Good morning. Several weeks ago, we looked at some parables that Jesus told in the New Testament. Today, we're going to look at another one. Most of you have heard this story many times. You probably think it's just another story that Jesus told his followers and that it had meaning for them in those days, but maybe not so much for us today. However, this morning, I want you to consider how relevant this story is in our world. It may have happened in our town. If you really think about it, I think you'll agree that it could have happened right here in Plymouth in 2019. Let me tell you a modern day parable. One day a man was walking along the road. He was not in the best section of town, but he was minding his own business, just on his way to work or to visit a friend or even on his way home. We don't really know. Suddenly, out of nowhere, some men jumped into his path. The man tried to ignore them and keep walking. He nodded hello and moved around them, but the men would not let him pass. They grabbed him, held him down. They took his money, his watch, his wedding ring, and his wallet. His wallet contained his credit cards, his driver's license, pictures of his kids. And after they had robbed him, they beat him severely. He was repeatedly punched, kicked, and stomped. By the time the criminals finished with him, he was barely recognizable. His face was a bloody mess. His ribs, probably broken, hurt too much to move, and he could hardly even see out of his eyes because they were swollen so badly. The thieves ran off with his belongings, his valuables, and they left him lying on the side of the road. As the man lay there, in and out of consciousness, he knew that he could not get up to go get help. He was completely at the mercy of anyone who would come by and help him. After he lay there for a while, he heard a car coming. He tried to raise his head, but he couldn't. As he squinted into the sun, the car came right at him. As it passed by, he saw a man looking out of the window. He cried out hoarsely, "Help!" The car slowed, but it didn't stop. As he stared at the bumper, he saw a clergy bumper sticker on the car. And he thought, "Oh, a preacher. Surely he'll turn around and come back to help me." But after a few minutes, he realized that the preacher was not coming back. It made him sad. A few minutes later, he heard another sound. Not a car, but the sound of something moving. He opened his eyes again, and he saw a woman riding toward him on a bicycle. He thought he recognized her. Yes, she was a deacon at the local church. That church was always talking about how they helped people. Surely she would help him. As the woman rode closer, she noticed the man lying there. She got close enough to see him, but not close enough to touch. She stopped and looked. Again, he called out for help. The man thought surely she was going to offer him some help, but instead she pedaled her bike to the other side of the street and kept going. So the man thought, well, maybe she's going to get help and will come back. She might be afraid to stop and help a man on the street all by herself. After waiting another half hour, the man had to admit that the woman was not coming back either. He was even sadder. Finally, after laying on the side of the road most of the day, he heard someone else coming. This person was walking. The man opened his eyes as best he could, and he suddenly got scared. Was it one of the thieves coming back? No, it wasn't them, but this man looked very much like them. He was the same race that they were. He wore the same type of clothes, and he had the same music blaring from his headphones. The man thought to himself, there is no use trying to speak to him. He'll never help me. He's just like the people who beat me up. So he laid his head back down and waited. The man was surprised when the other man came directly to him, touched his shoulder, and asked, "Hey man, are you okay?" The hurt man answered him as best he could through swollen lips. "No, some guys beat me up and robbed me and left me here to die. Can you help me?" The man who stopped knelt down, took off his own shirt and ripped it into strips to make bandages. He pulled a bottle of water out of his pocket and cleaned the dirt and the blood from the man's face. He then pulled out a cell phone and called an ambulance. He stayed with the man until the ambulance came. Then he rode with him to the hospital, made sure that the man received the care he needed. Before he left, he gave his name and number to the hospital and asked to be called when the man was able to leave. The victim of the beating and robbery spent a lot of time thinking about his day. He fully expected the preacher to be the one to help him, but he didn't. Then he was sure that the deacon would help, or at least go get someone to help him, but she didn't. He never expected the man who helped him to stop and help. In fact, he thought that the man was a criminal and might hurt him even more. He decided that he really needed to rethink his ideas of who his neighbor was. This story is essentially the same story that Jesus told in our scripture. It's just modernized a little. Many people have read or heard this story and thought that the message was simply, everyone is your neighbor. However, I believe that this parable carries a much more complicated message. In fact, I think that Jesus had in mind a message for each character in the story. First, let's look at the priest, or in our story, the preacher. The priest in the story walked by the man on the side of the road without ever really giving him a second glance. Did he have a reason? Possibly. Maybe he was on his way to the temple. Maybe he was the priest chosen to offer sacrifices that day. If so, he would have been aware of several things that prevented him from helping the man. The Jews in those days were very strict about their rituals and rules. If the priest was scheduled to perform a ritual, he couldn't miss it or be late, or he would forfeit his turn. This was a great honor, and he would not want to miss it. Possibly he was thinking about the laws of purification and cleanliness. If he touched a bloody person, he would become unclean, and then he would not be allowed to go into the temple for a certain length of time. A priest who had become unclean was of no use to anyone. Maybe these were his reasons for passing by. Now compare that to the preacher in our story. Maybe he was on his way to church to preach. Imagine he had an entire congregation waiting for him. Or possibly he had to visit a sick or bereaved person. Everyone knows that the preacher can't keep you waiting. We expect the preacher to be there when we need him or her. If you expect him to be somewhere, they better be there. Maybe that was his reason for not stopping. However, I think Jesus would say to the priest or the preacher that people waiting on them, or even the laws of cleanliness, are not more important than helping a person in need. That would be the message of the story to the priest. Now let's look at the Levite or the deacon in our story. His or her passing by was possibly even worse because he or she stopped to actually look at the man before crossing the road to walk past. That seems so callous. Why did he do it? The reasons could be much the same as the priest. Maybe he was late for something important. Again, helping out in the temple was an honor that the Levite would not want to miss. If he were unclean, he could not take part in the rituals either. The deacon might have been concerned about her safety. I think Jesus' message to the Levite or the deacon is the same as to the priest. Nothing is more important than helping our fellow human being when they are in need. Well, let's think about the man lying on the side of the road. We don't know a lot about him. We assume he was a Jew because Jesus made a point of the neighbor being a Samaritan. The Samaritans and the Jews hated each other. More specifically, the Jews hated the Samaritans. They considered them half-breeds and believed that they were a lower class race of people. And that's the key to what makes this parable meaningful. The man lying on the side of the road had certain expectations. He expected the priest or the Levite to help him. He did not expect the Samaritan to help him. Why? Because he thought of the Samaritans as a lower form of life, less of a person. No Samaritan could actually do something good or nice. That did not conform to his expectations of the Samaritans. His preconceived notion was that the Samaritan would not care for him or help him. That's not who he thought they were. Well, let's look at that in our story. When the man lying by the road saw his helper coming, he panicked. He saw the man's race, the type of clothes he was wearing, heard the music he was listening to, and he prejudged him to be a troublemaker. I think Jesus' message to him, as well as to us, is that we should not hold so tight to our expectations and prejudices. The Samaritan in the parable became the unexpected neighbor to the man who was hurt. What about you? What preconceived notions and prejudices do you have? When you meet someone of a different race on the street, do you clutch your purse a little bit tighter? When you see someone who might be Middle Eastern on an airplane, do you fear for your life? When you see a young man with baggy clothes and pants sagging down, what do you think of him? Do your expectations keep you from possibly having an encounter with a potential neighbor? Do they keep you from ministering to someone out of fear? Who is your unexpected neighbor? Finally, let's look at the Good Samaritan himself. Do you think he was unaware of the man's thoughts and attitudes? Not likely. As a Samaritan, it would have been drilled into him from an early age that he was not acceptable company for a Jew. In his society, as in ours, it's difficult not to know and feel the prejudices against certain types of people. Just as the priest and the Levite had what they thought were legitimate excuses for not helping the man, the Samaritan could easily have passed by with the excuse that man doesn't like me. He wouldn't want me to stop anyway. But he didn't. Regardless of the prejudices and expectations of his society, the Samaritan did the right thing and he stopped to help. I think Jesus was saying that this man understood the true meaning of neighbor and of community and of love. He disregarded the expectations of the man and the rest of the world to do the right thing. So how about us? Do we ever get caught up in the expectations of the world and let them keep us from doing the right thing? Do we avoid certain parts of town because of the people who live there? Do we stay away from certain people because they're not our kind of people? Are we truly living out our mandate as Christians to show Christ to the world? Does the world know we are Christians by our love? Who is it in your world that can be an unexpected neighbor, or that you can be an unexpected neighbor to? Let's ask God to show us and change our expectations of the world and those around us.